When you read a parable like this parable in Luke chapter 16, Jesus' parable, it sure seems like Jesus is highlighting, well, let me tell you how the world really works. It's a world of favors and manipulation. I was listening the other day to a podcast with someone who would be considered a futurist. A futurist is a person who thinks about what might be happening, what might be coming. And they referenced that there were three, I'm going to call them disruptions, that are happening in our culture right now that's making everyone feel kind of anxious. The first thing they referenced is AI. I understand many of you maybe don't know artificial intelligence. I don't know enough about it to talk very, very intelligently about it. But the people who know say this is going to be one of the great shifts in our culture. Do you remember what it was like before you had a cell phone everywhere you went? Do you remember this? It's kind of going to be, they say, even bigger than the shift that went from, before we had cell phones to now having cell phones. But it's what they're saying is it's going to disrupt industries. So if you're in medicine, it could potentially disrupt your job. If you're in accounting, it could potentially disrupt your job. I've got some pictures. Some of you may say, well, it's not that big a deal. That what AI can create. So you just give it a few prompts. You say, hey, give me a picture of. And so I've got some pictures, and you're going to think someone took these photos. Throw that next one up there. Do you see those? Someone put in a prompt in a computer and said, give me pictures, and they described what they're looking for. That's what you got. Next one. Someone put this, you think someone took these pictures? They look amazing, don't they? The detail, the lighting, the shadowing. How beautiful is that? Someone on a computer, give me detailed pictures of hands. So they're saying that this is going to disrupt everything. You can create videos now where you can put someone else's face on the video, and it's really hard to tell. Something's happening. Second thing they mentioned is the fertility rates in really across the world. I've got a graph here for you of the fertility rates around the globe, and you can see that it's been going down. The replacement rate is 2.1 births per woman, and you can see that we are on track to be below that. Now, maybe you don't know what the birth rate is in the United States of America. Do you know what it is? 1.62. All kinds of prognosticators have said, well, we're not quite sure why this is happening, but one of the kind of collective understandings about why that might be happening is people say, well, I think people have a sense of despair about what's going to come in the world, and they don't have the hope that this would be a good world to bring kids into, and so they're deciding not to bring kids into the world. So with technology, what we're saying about our technology is almost that technology is greater than people. And then when you talk about fertility rates around the globe, there's this global kind of sense of despair that seems to be setting in. And then here's the third one. This doesn't affect everybody in the room, but everybody will be affected in an odd way, is the price of a home. What the prognosticators are saying is, listen, if you're in Gen Z, good luck buying a home. I understand some of you, a couple generations ahead of that, you may look around and go, well, what was the deal? I had a job, and then I went and I bought a house, and what's the big deal? Why can't people just work hard enough to afford a home? Why can't they do what we did? Well, the wages have not kept up. The house prices have skyrocketed. The interest rates are through the roof. And so there's all these disparities taking place in our culture economically. So the rich are getting richer, and the middle class are staying more middle class, and the poor are not getting much better off. There's all these disruptions that are happening in our world at the moment, and what do we do? I want to suggest to you that in times of great disruption, we need what the book of Chronicles in the Old Testament said. We need people who understand. In Chronicles, there were people who understood the times and knew what should be done. People who are, and Jesus used this word in this parable we just read from Luke 16, people who are shrewd. Can you turn to your neighbor and just say, I think you're pretty shrewd? What is shrewd? Some of you are like, I'm not sure. What is shrewd? Here's what shrewd is. Shrewd is a sense of understanding about what's happening, and at the same time knowing how to act. We need people who are shrewd. Now, we're in this series. We're exploring what Jesus reveals to us about God. So what we've been trying to say in this series is when you see Jesus, you see what God is like. And here's my question that we're going to unpack during our time here together this morning. It's this: what if you could understand what God understands. Try a thought experiment with me for a second. Take the most successful person that you know that is in your field, your line of work, your business, whatever it is that you do, education, whatever it might be. And the most successful person that you can think of. And what if you could understand all that they understand that allows them to operate at the level that they operate? You go to conferences, don't you, to go hear somebody, and you listen to someone who's successful, and they say, well, I do this, I think this way. How, if you could do that, how would that change your view on your problems and your hopes? Now, what's my point behind this? Is there anyone who is more successful than God? Kind of goes with the title, doesn't it? I'm God, I'm successful. And here's Jesus. He's going to give us one of the parables. And when I studied this parable, I was kind of scared because this is one of maybe Jesus' most confusing parables. But the more I dug into it, the more I realized there's an insight here that you and I need to know, that Jesus reveals to us a God who is shrewd, who understands and knows how to act. So here's what we're going to do this morning. I want to give you 4 layers that you and I are going to need to kind of peel back in order to understand God better. We're going to peel back 4 layers. Here they are. If you're taking notes, they'll be on the screen, and you can follow along. Here we go. Here's the first layer. You and I have to understand how it is that God defines what's wrong with the world. Sitting at Starbucks this week, schedule got a little messed up, and I was working on my message on, I think, Wednesday morning, and I overhear the baristas around the corner, and they're talking about someone they work with, and they're talking about a difficult situation, and they said this phrase, and they said, and that is what's wrong with the world. Raise your hand if you've ever said that phrase, or you've wondered that. What is wrong with the world? What are the explanatory options? Because that's a very common question. We think it's other people. We think it's self-centered people. Maybe we think it's the power structures. It's the people with money, or it's the people who have political power, or maybe it's people with bad character who are in leadership. We've built all these wells in Malawi, Africa, one of the 10 poorest countries in the world. And if you know anything about developing countries like that, what you discover pretty quickly is that one of the reasons they are in that situation globally, applies to virtually any country in that kind of scenario, is there's corrupt leadership. So aid goes in. Now, we've made sure this doesn't happen with these wells, but large amounts of aid will go in, and those leaders will take that for themselves. There's corrupt leadership. Maybe that's what's wrong with the world. Or maybe you think the problem with the world is ideological. It's people who don't see it like you do. Frankly, we all believe we're right. Isn't that correct? Right? Turn to your neighbor and say, I'm righter than you. That's bad grammar, but just tell them that. I'm righter than you. Here's what we usually never say, never admit about what is wrong with the world. You know what the problem never is? It's never me. It's always somebody else that's the problem. That's what's wrong with the world. Aristotle, who was one of the great philosophers of all human history, he had what he called in about 300 BC, what he called the 4 cardinal virtues. I'm going to put it on the screen. If you were to Google these, this is what would come up. So I gave, even in the Greek, what he called these. These are the 4 cardinal virtues. He said, a good person needs these virtues in their life. First one is wisdom, and then justice and virtue. Actually, these first 2 words here are 2 words that Jesus uses in this parable. And then he says that you need self-control, and you need what he calls fortitude or courage. So here's what Aristotle would say about what's wrong with the world. He would say, well, what's wrong is people haven't cultivated the kind of inner world that builds a character that's wise and full of virtue and has self-control and has courage. And so if you were to sit down at coffee with Aristotle this week, he would look at you and he would ask you some questions. And then he would say, well, you're missing this and this. And so I'll tell you what's wrong with the world. It's kind of your fault. The Bible paints the Bible's word for what's wrong with the world is very similar to that. You know the word, it's 3 letters. The word is sin. And in the original language, it's a term from archery that means to miss the mark. When the Bible paints the picture of what's wrong with the world, it says, here's what's wrong with the world, is that we miss the mark fundamentally of 2 things. Love for God and love for our neighbor. That does not mean emotion that I feel or or feelings that I have about God, or emotion that I feel, or feelings that I feel about my neighbor. It's the action that I take toward God and toward my neighbor. I'm a big fan of Dallas Willard. If you're around, you hear me quote him all the time. I love his definition of what love is. I'm going to put it on the screen for you. This is what he says. Love is the genuine inner readiness and longing to secure the good of others. We miss that mark. That's what the Bible says. The problem is you and I miss that mark. Now, on all this talk about what a virtuous person is, here's where we get hung up. We go, oh yeah, that's great. Yeah, 4 cardinal virtues, don't sin. Hey, that's exactly right. That's what we're supposed to be. But we all operate with this. Doesn't matter where you come from, what your background is. You think this. You go, well, that might be what it's supposed to be. But let me tell you how it actually is, how the world really works. Yeah. Virtue, righteousness, all those things. Here's what really happens. And when you read a parable like this parable in Luke chapter 16, Jesus' parable, it sure seems like Jesus is highlighting, well, let me tell you how the world really works. It's a world of favors and manipulations. There's this rich man, and then the manager of this rich man's family who he's going to be fired because he hasn't been using the money well. His job performance is low, and the rich man hears about it, and he comes, he says, listen, you're out, buddy. I'm sorry. We've talked about this. You're done. And the rich man says, I don't know what I'm going to do. Or the manager says, I don't know what I'm going to do. And says, aha, I know what I'm going to do. And so he goes to the creditors and he says, you owe how much? I'll make it this. You owe how much? I'll make it this. And so the rich man comes back and he's just kind of, you can almost hear him. He just kind of laughs. He's like, oh my, seriously? That's what you did? Well, I'm going to have to let you go. But, I mean, kind of well done. Well played, sir. Well played. Nicely played. And you can almost hear this rich guy, say to his rich buddies afterwards, he's like, you're not going to believe what one of my money manager did. I mean, can you believe what this guy did? I mean, isn't that unbelievable? And all his rich buddies are like, yeah, I had a guy who did something like that one time. And what they do is they turn a blind eye because they've got plenty of money, so they don't really care. And it seems like, doesn't it, if you read that parable, that Jesus is saying, well, that is how the world works, and that's what you have to do. You have to play a version of that game. Is that what Jesus is saying? Jesus actually judges that whole thing. The whole parable is a judgment on that whole way of thinking. And he has a word there. We're going to explore it here more in just a minute. It's in verse 8, 9, 10, and 11. I highlighted it for you in verse 9 here. He calls it unrighteous. Unrighteous. And Jesus is saying, listen, unrighteousness exists in the world. It is unfair. Shrewd people take advantage of it. And that is a huge part of what is wrong with the world. Now, why is it important that we have an understanding about what's wrong with the world and we can get in line with how God sees it? Well, I think, here's the payoff for you. I think that what it does is it makes you honest and humble because it keeps you from playing the blame game. Well, it's their fault. And you start to see your complicity in how things are, and you say with humility, because this is what humble people do, they say, I think I have missed the mark in some way.